Going to have a look now at what's grabbing the headlines. In the newspapers, my children, 3 of them, half of them, sort of spending a lot of time at home today, Flo. This is because the Education Minister is facing a teachers' strike here today over a controversial secondary school reform.
That's right. Thousands of teachers are going to take to the streets here in Paris and major cities across France to protest against this reform by the Education Minister, Vallaud-Belkacem. She's on the front page of Le Parisien aujourd'hui en France today, looking quite defiant, I must say. La Fronde, she's facing a teachers' rebellion. Now, this secondary school, or collège, as it's called here in France, the reform about collège is quite complex and complicated, but essentially it aims at putting all students on a level playing field. Now, Le Parisien is among the critics of this reform. It says that instead of bringing everyone to a higher playing field, it's going to basically lower everyone's standards to the common denominator. And indeed, this is one of the main criticisms that we're seeing of this reform.
And critics also saying the government hasn't spent nearly enough time talking to teachers, really, about what's best.
That's exactly what L'Humanité says. It says we didn't actually spend enough time consulting teachers before this reform was put in place. You can see L'Humanité here on their front page, the communist paper, saying, what if we actually listen to what teachers have to say about the secondary school reform? Now, there's one group that you might imagine is really loving everything that's happening, and this is the right-wing press here in France. Le Figaro among them. They're loving everything that's happening. If we take a look at their front page here, you can see Vallaud-Belkacem there with the Prime Minister Manuel Valls. The government is getting bogged down in this reform. Now, Le Figaro has a poll today that says that 60% of French people are against this reform. They disapprove of it. So Le Figaro says basically across the political spectrum, protesters agree. They say that this reform is going to be a race towards the bottom that will level down students. So exactly what Le Parisien was saying, instead of pulling students up to a higher denominator. Everyone agrees except for the government. According to Le Figaro, the government is being stubborn in its error. Basically, there is a deep malaise, according to Le Figaro, that goes really beyond political divisions.
Other papers disagreeing, though, saying, no, this debate is actually all about politics.
That's exactly what Les Echos, the business paper, says in its editorial today. It actually takes a closer look about how this debate about reforming schools turned into a debate about politics. Now, Les Echos goes back to the very beginning and says that the very first debates were about basically fighting against boredom in the classroom, getting teachers to work together, and giving schools a little bit more leeway. That was all that the reform was about. Now, when did things change? It changed when the UMP leader, Nicolas Sarkozy, stepped into the ring, and that woke up François Hollande, the president, that, according to Les Echos, is the eternal candidate. And basically, this whole reform about schools turned into a political fight about achieving student excellence. So, according to Les Echos, those who don't see any politics in this really have to take a closer look.
Now, a quick word about the European Union from Flo and its policies in the Mediterranean.
That's right. Le Figaro is taking a closer look at that meeting between EU ministers that approved this plan to set up a naval force to combat people smugglers operating from Libya. Le Figaro says that the Union really had to lower its ambitions and basically put off the destruction of smuggler boats. Why is that? For 2 reasons, according to Le Figaro. First of all, the EU would need the approval of the UN Security Council, and Russia isn't really on board. But also, according to Le Figaro, the EU wants to avoid any escalation of violence. Basically, if the European Union attacked smugglers on Libyan soil, for instance, well, it could provoke a counterattack. And Le Figaro says that this could lead to a major downward spiral in the very volatile region.
Now, finally, we're going to have a look at Libération. The paper has an interview with one of the surviving Charlie Hebdo cartoonists today, doesn't it?
That's right. That's Tues, and he gives an exclusive interview to Libération. You can see on the front page, he explains why he's leaving Charlie Hebdo. You can see this quote here. I will no longer be Charlie Hebdo, but I will always be Charlie. Now, what's interesting is Tues was actually supposed to be at the meeting on January 7th. He was saved, actually, by the fact that his birthday was the day before, and so he arrived late at the editorial meeting. It's a very moving interview. He explains just how much his life really completely changed afterwards. I mean, not only did he lose his colleagues, he lost some of his best friends in the attack, and also he became, against his will in a lot of ways, the living symbol of the Je suis Charlie movement, a movement that had really became political in a lot of ways. And so in this interview, he explains how he had to really keep drawing. He had to keep the magazine going. It became torture, according to Luz. I spent sleepless nights haunted by the ghosts of Charles, Cabu, Honoré, Tues, so a lot of the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists who were killed in the attack. What would they have done to continue the magazine? It really became torture, according to Luz. You can see this quote here in Libération. It says, at one point, the weight of it all just became too heavy to carry on my shoulders.
He is coming out with a book this week as well.
Absolutely. Now, in Libération, he explains that to stay sane in many ways, he really had to draw. It was a very tough thing for him to do. He often had no inspiration whatsoever, but he really had to draw about his thoughts, what he was experiencing, his everyday life, and he basically compiled all these drawings into a book. It's called Catharsis. It's coming out this week, and I actually got a sneak peek of the book. It's really touching, wonderful. It's about courage, continuing, a lot about love as well. It's really moving, and so if you can get a copy, I definitely recommend it.
Okay, Luz leaving Charlie Hebdo in Libération today. We wish him well, of course. Flo, thank you very much, Flo, with the French papers.